I want to ask you a question. Are you rich? Are you rich? But I don't mean in terms of friendships and relationships. I mean, are you wealthy? Material possessions, luxuries. Now, I've asked that question to countless numbers of audiences from people from all different walks of lives, and invariably the response I get is rich. Who's rich? And that's rather strange, because in the course of history, there has never been the type of wealth, the type of abundance that we enjoy today. The common man today enjoys luxuries that kings of yesteryear could not imagine. And I'd like to share with you an observation to really feel that. My grandmother grew up in Poland around World War I era, and she described to me her home. Her house was a two-room house, but 2 rooms meant 2 rooms. One where the parents slept, and the other room where the children slept, ate, did their chores, and did everything else. But believe me, the rooms were not very large, and the family sure were. She was wealthy because she had a floor made of wood, unlike her friends who grew up on dirt floors. And if you think about the fact that 100 years ago, maybe even less, many of our ancestors lived in the most primitive manner that we can't even imagine, without running water, without toilets in the house, without electricity, without air conditioning. People lived, driving horse and buggies, living a very primitive existence by our standards. And when you think back to that era and compare it to ours, you see stark differences. My father had a friend who went to a yeshiva in Europe around somewhere before World War II, and he had a way of telling whether it was a cold morning or not. The room that he slept in wasn't heated. He would leave his negavas with a cup of water for washing in the morning. He would leave it at the foot of his bed. He would open his eyes in the morning and he'd look at the top of the water. If the water was frozen over, it was a cold day. If the water was still liquid, it wasn't that cold. But the point is that water freezes at 32 degrees. The room he slept in often was colder than freezing. We don't live in that world. We live in a world of luxuries. We live in a world of comforts. And if you were to compare our life to different time periods, you'd see we're astoundingly wealthy. King George III, who reigned over England during the Revolutionary War period, was known as a powerful monarch. And there's a famous picture of him. It's a portrait. He's sitting on the throne wearing his royal robes, which are thick. And on top of those thick robes was a very heavy pelt. And on top of that pelt was another fur. And there's King George III sitting there in all of his royal splendor, big, large, filling up the whole area. Why is it that the King of England was wearing a thick robe and a heavy pelt and a heavy other coat on top of it? Because in the king's palace, it was freezing cold. How did you heat up the palace? There was a fireplace some 100 feet, 150 feet forward over there. Fireplace emits heat through radiation. It radiates out. So it's very nice and well if this part of you is in front of the fireplace, but that part of you isn't. So if you turn around and you get this part nice and warm, well, this part is cold. The king, with all of his wealth, owning the crown jewels, could not heat his palace. He walked dank, smelly hallways at night. He sank into a bed of 36 inches of down feather. Did you ever sit down on a down pillow? It just, and that means his spine went, and there was no chiropractor in the morning to put him back together. And when the King of England rode to the Earl of France's wedding, he got into a horse and buggy with wooden wheels on pot-filled roads, holes. He would get into this wood-wheeled wagon, and the King of England would go for 2 weeks straight, riding, going, bumping, bumping, bumping. I'm a simple person. I get into my Toyota Camry. I have air cushion shocks. I have climate control. There are no arguments about heat in my family. My wife's side is this dial, and my side is this dial. In my Toyota Camry, I enjoy a ride that the kings of France, of England, could not imagine. I have stereo systems in my car, 6 speakers, and I can choose any imaginable type of music, and at a flick of a button I can switch from Bach to Beethoven to Yeshiva Boys Choir, and that's something that people didn't have yesteryear. And if you compare their lifestyle to our lifestyle, what you see is that we are astonishingly wealthy. Our clothing, our food, our homes. If you take the house of Rothschild from the 1700s, you and I live in nicer homes than did the wealthiest tycoons of yesteryear. And this is the point. You could have unimaginable wealth, but if you don't train yourself to appreciate it, you might as well be poor. And if you don't train yourself to appreciate the riches that you have, you're not going to enjoy them, you're not going to benefit from them. You have to do the work to focus on it, to appreciate it, to understand how wealthy it is that we really are.